All right. Well, welcome to our expert series. I'm very excited to have Dafne. She is the CEO, founder, president, all those titles for launchpoint.co. And she's been a friend of mine for a couple of years now through Entrepreneurs Organization. She's helping us currently establish better processes, systems, and documentation in our businesses. But at LaunchPoint, she helps support businesses in the early middle market who are looking to improve cross-functional efficiency, get siloed teams on the same page, and build a solid operational foundation that they can continue growing on. And I just want to add just one little caveat to this, or I'd say positioning statement of why processes and systems are so important when you're getting ready to exit your business, whether that exit is a year away or 10 years away. If you think about most businesses, and this goes for very small businesses to very large businesses, most of the expertise, most of the know-how, the intellectual property, if you will, is in the owner's head. And the biggest hurdle we have to overcome is finding a buyer that feels like they can replace the seller and knowing everything that the seller knows. So if you remove that and you actually have a really good system for documenting that expertise, that intellectual property that can transition from one owner to another, you inherently have a more valuable company. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Dafne, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, really excited to be here with everyone.
Okay, so first, I gave a really brief introduction. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, your story, and really what LaunchPoint does for their clients.
So I'm originally from Sweden, but I've been here in the States now for almost 20 years. But if you hear a little twang here and there, that's where that comes in. And the part that I did know about coming to the States is I love small business owners and I love being an entrepreneur, and they don't have that in Sweden. So love that. I've worked my entire career for entrepreneurial businesses. And let's just say that process and systems is not at the top of their list of things they like, although they know they need them. So I was always that person in the entrepreneurial business that goes, hey, let's bring some order to this chaos. Sometimes welcome, sometimes not. I moved from about a decade of doing that into owning a business with my husband, sold that to an employee. And I just knew I had to keep working for myself. I had caught the entrepreneurial bug. And so now LaunchPoint has been in business for over 5 years. And we help companies in more simple terms with process optimization, implementation, documentation. And then we also couple that with software optimization and implementation, because we believe those two really have to go hand in hand if you want to be as effective and efficient as possible.
Great. Thank you for that. It was interesting. I don't think we've ever talked about it. No, you're from Sweden. So, but yes, we're lucky to have you in the States, and you're totally right. Most business owners, myself included, don't love to document processes. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that is, and I know you've worked on a number of different businesses that have transitioned, they have sold, right? And you've helped with the preparation process of that, not just as an exit factor partner, but even in the past. So from your perspective, why do you believe that processes are so important in the sale or transition of a business?
I love that question. And you started touching on that in the introduction too. And one of the things is that no one wants to buy a job. Like if you go to buy a job, you might as well just get a job instead of buying the whole company and having to be responsible for all of those things. So no one wants to buy a job. So you need, as an owner, to extract yourself from as much of the day-to-day as possible. So that's why processes are really important. Otherwise, like you said, it all just lives in the owner's head, and the bus stops with you. If someone buys your business, they also want to be able to replicate or even improve the results that you've gotten. And if they don't know how you go about doing that, they're going to have to take, some downtime when they first buy the business to figure that out, and then, ramp back results again. And not something they want to do either. And also, as I'm sure you tell all of your clients, it increases the value of your business in the eyes of the buyer if you have processes that are established, documented, and followed by all. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, and I'll talk more about this later, but if you're documenting processes the quote unquote right way, you should also be getting more efficient, which a potential buyer of a business, they like efficient businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. Which actually, you spurred a new question there for me, is that we are talking about this in the frame of selling a business, but like, really, when is the ideal time to start this process? Because I assume I know there's a lot of benefits that you get from documenting these processes the right way, even or very early on in your formation of your company. So like, when is like that right time, or is it a metric of how many employees? Like, how do you judge what the right time is to start documenting these processes?
I like to tell business owners that, when we first open our doors, we're just trying to prove our business idea and start getting clients. But once you've proven your business idea and you know that, hey, we're going to have a steady flow of clients coming through the door, that can be different revenue marks, different, team sizes. But usually it's around the 3 to 5 in team size. And you're probably right around $500,000 to $1 million in revenue, depending on what industry you're in. That's when you should start documenting processes. You don't have to go too deep in the weeds at that point. And then we often see companies hit different stages of growth where they then need to go back and almost do an overhaul because, they outgrew, QuickBooks Online and need to go into an ERP, or you're adding another product or service line, or you're expanding to different states. And then you have to go back and really upgrade the processes that you've documented up until that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. So 3 to 5, that makes sense. The upgrade makes a lot of sense. Actually, that's why you're helping one of my businesses right now, because we've just reached a different level. We'll probably talk about it a little bit later too, but you also at Lunch Point, you help tie in the technology too to this documentation, because the technology is really important to making everything happen. So let's start, like, how do we get this process started? Like, some of us have never documented anything. Some of us have like a Word or a Google Doc with a few bullet points. Some of us may have a Lucid chart. So like, where do we start, and what are the most important things to document first?
So I would give 2 different answers. If you're planning to sell pretty soon, then you want to document anything that only lives in your head or that only you can do. So get that down on paper, whether it's a process, procedures, how to get that documented. If we are looking more bigger picture, and maybe you have a year or 2 longer than that you're preparing for sale, or you're just documenting processes, I always like to tell business owners to start with the customer journey and the employee journey. And so those are the 2 overarching journeys that are true for any business. Obviously, when it comes to your customer journey, that might be for services or different products. But something that I see a lot of businesses do is we start in the weeds because we want to get this one thing off our plate. So I'm just going to create this procedure with this checklist and now I'm done. But we hire intelligent people, and most of them don't need to be taught how to do the thing that's in the weeds, but we need to give them the big picture of how our business functions and how it works. And so that's why I really like to start with that customer journey and employee journey, and then you can drill down into the details where it makes sense. And the last part I would add is your secret sauce. What is it that sets you apart as a company? Is it how you interact with your customers? Is it the culture that you've built? Is it this one product that you sell? But make sure that you document that secret sauce, because that needs to live on as you grow or sell.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I totally agree with documenting what's in the owner's head first, especially if you're going through to an exit. But it's really interesting that you bring up the customer journey, because this was something that I was introduced through our process with you recently, is that I think, and I hope we're not alone in this. I assume most business owners do this, but when we were documenting processes in our business, we were like documenting silo processes of how to submit an invoice, how to sign a contract with a new client, how to get a client listed for sale. Right. But we didn't think about the whole customer journey, and exactly how our different processes and employees were interacting with our customer along that journey. And what we're coming to start to evaluate, and I think which could be a very good efficiency opportunity for us, is like, how many times are we touching a customer during the onboarding process? How much are we asking them to do? How complex are we making this for them, when it really should be a simple, onboarding interaction procedure? So that was a new innovation for us in this space. And I really liked starting with that customer and employee journey, because really those are the 2 relationships you need to solidify not just if you're selling your business, but if you want to run a highly optimized one, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm sure you get this objection from a lot of business owners is, I don't have time. Do you get that objection?
That's the number one objection that we get.
Okay.
Yes.
And not just to you, Daphne, but probably just to this entire concept, right? Like I totally get it. I'll get to this when I have time, right? So let's talk about some different ways people can go about putting these in place in their business without investing a lot of time.
So I would go back and start asking yourself some of the questions that we just talked about. Like if you are putting your business up for sale here pretty quickly and you're looking to turn things around, you need to get things out of your head. You don't necessarily need to put those on paper. Maybe there's, 50% of them that can be quick Loom videos. And then you have a library of Loom videos of great. Here are the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. Now they're documented, but I documented them as a video while I did them. That's just a super simple. If you're like, I'm really crunched for time, I got to get this done. Another thing that I just touched on with the previous question is don't go too far into the weeds. So how you were talking about the, how to get this contract signed or how to, complete this one form. That's great. But again, there's probably someone on your team or several people on your team who knows how to do that. And the more important process to document is the overarching journey, which should not take you as long by any means. And it might sound silly, but it's going to provide a lot of clarity and value to your employees once you sit down and everyone gets on the same page of how does a customer go from A through Z in our company. And you're going to find that you probably have a couple of people that do it a couple of different ways, and maybe that's okay, but you're probably going to find a ton of efficiencies that you're implementing or get everyone on the same page. But those process maps that you can build in Lucidchart, not going to take you long. And, record that meeting and then hand over that meeting to maybe a VA or an executive assistant that you have and have them build the flow chart, which really goes into the delegate this to the team. If you have, let's say, 10 core processes that you want to document, have each team member document their own core process and then have them swap with another team member, check each other's work and say, hey, I don't quite understand this process over here, or these are the questions that come up for me. Not only do you get your process documented that way, you also get some cross training because people are looking at someone else's work. But then also decide, what do you really need to document? Why am I documenting this? Obviously, in this instance, it's most likely for sale. But when you're think about who are you documenting it for? How are they going to consume it? When are they going to consume it? And it will help you to really evaluate how far in the weeds you need to go. If you can do a quick screen recording, you can put a quick checklist in place, or if you can just do a brief flow chart.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest part that feels overwhelming. Like I think most business owners, when they think about the process of documenting processes, it's too far in the weeds. Like I know when we first put ours together, we for submitting the invoice, like we would be like, okay, well, you go to QuickBooks and you click this link and then you click this sublink and then the date gets filled in like this and like all the detail. Right. And really, most intelligent human beings could probably have figured out 75% of that on their own if I had just given them the first two steps. Right. So, and I think that's where, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, is where it feels overwhelming to business owners, is it feels like this bear of a project to document all this stuff, where it's really like, if you're thinking about it, I'm thinking about it kind of like in a bullet pointed list. We just need the main bullet points. And I love that you brought up Loom, because Loom is a super powerful tool. If you guys aren't familiar with Loom, it's free, or it's like very low cost if you hit your maximum video recordings, things like that. But it's just such an easy tool to use. Are there other tools that you suggest, Dafne, or other types of systems that can help organize all of this data too?
So Lucidchart, I already mentioned, which is a great one. Miro is another similar process mapping software. I also love Trainua. They give you a ton of different templates also as you go in there. So if you choose, I want to document this process, they'll give you an example of what that process might look like and some different prompts for you to think about, which makes it easier to not go way into the weeds either.
And the one follow-up question that I have for you, because you didn't mention this, is that if you are really strapped for time, right, you can outsource this process, right? And I know this will feel a little bit like a self plug, but I think it's really valuable to our audience. So can you just walk us through a little bit how LaunchPoint does help document and get processes and systems organized for a company as an outsourced solution?
Yes. And a lot of companies like to outsource this because they don't like process. But we really perfected our own process of this to take an hour of someone's time a week. So it depends on the process. So let's say that we're doing, the client onboarding process. Whoever is involved in that process, we get into a Zoom room for an hour. We ask you questions to really figure out, well, where are the pain points? What's working? What's not working? How are you currently doing this? Look at the long-term goals that you have so we can plan not just for a process that's going to work today, but work in the future. Then we start by providing you with a process map, if that makes sense, and then go as far into the SOP as we feel like we need to based on all the questions we've asked you. But it's an iterative process. So discovery, iterate, and then we have a finished SOP that we love to put into Trainua or some other type of LMS for you.
Okay. That makes lots of, thank you. And I know everybody would appreciate that overview of how you work together. So, before we get into our last couple of questions, and for those of you that are live, if you do have questions for Dafne, now would be a great time to drop them in the Q&A box. Dafne, you mentioned followed by all as one of the most important steps. So I hear that thrown around a lot. So let's just start by what does that mean, followed by all? And let's start there, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about how can you make that happen with your team.
Mm-hmm. So followed by all means that people are not doing a process their own way unless you've said you can do this your own way. So everyone is on the same page about here's how all of the processes across our organization works, and here's how we execute on them. And there's a couple of different strategies for getting people on board with following your processes. One of them is not locking yourself away in a room and documenting an SOP and then emailing out to people and saying, great, I need you to follow this. They're probably just going to delete that email and ignore you and never follow that process. So if you're really considering your team members and you're involving them in the process of, we say process a lot, but involving them in the process of getting your processes codified and on paper, they're going to immediately have more buy-in because one, they feel like you value their opinion, even if ultimately you might disagree and go with, someone else's opinion on the team. They still feel like they got to voice how they do it, why they do it that way, and they can get on board with why we're going to move forward with, way B instead of way A. Another thing to consider is everything documented. Don't just email it out or post it on your intranet or something. Hold some sessions with your team where you're training them, even though they've been involved with getting this process documented. They can't be involved in every step along the way of getting it codified on paper. So have training sessions and open it up to Q&A, and here's how we're going to run it from now on. And for every process that you document, I really like to assign what I like to call a process champion, which is ideally the person who's accountable for making sure that this process is followed by all. If there are changes or updates or optimizations to it, this person either make those updates or they delegate it to someone else. So that process champion, they really make sure that, hey, we're all going to do this. This is all going to be great, but assign those process champions, assign KPIs to every process, which might sound like overkill. You're like, great, I already have KPIs and scorecards for my business. Now I need more KPIs. Mm-hmm. Yes. And the reason why you want to do that is otherwise someone doesn't always know if they're successful in following your process. So let's say that you have, Katie in accounting and she gets all of your invoices out by the 10th of every month. And you're like, well, Katie, you're not following the process. And she's like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. How am I not following the process? And you're like, well, I want all the invoices out by the 5th of the month. And if Katie doesn't know that, then she really can't follow the process because you haven't set all the expectations. And people really like to be successful at their jobs. So set those expectations, let them meet or exceed them. And then Last but not least, when you're rolling out new processes, if you've had processes in place before, or people have had a way that they're doing things before, they will often try to make a one-on-one comparison between the old way and the new way, and they're going to try to make them fit together. And that's most of the time that doesn't work. And so tell your team that, hey, we're going to take 30 days and we're just going to go with the new process. Like, write down all your thoughts or feedback or whatnot that you have as you're doing it this new way. And then in 30 days, we'll come together and we'll look at what those are. And if we need to make improvements, we will. But that way people get to work through those like crunchy feelings in the beginning of trying to get used to something new, and they don't try to change it right away. So 30 days after rolling it out, you're ideally only going to have actual changes that you want to make to the process.
That's all really good stuff. So I got a couple follow-ups that came out of that, and processing that. I feel like I'm more using that word so much today, in my mind. So first, I love the comparison thing. Like, they can compare one versus the other. And we talked about like that could, hinder the followed by all. Also, not involving them in the process of establishing the new process could hinder it. The one big thought I had around the KPIs, though, too, is that you might already have a KPI that a process could solve for, right? So I was thinking about sales processes, for example, right? Sales processes, or in sales in general, we have a lot of KPIs, but one could be time to close. We could have an NPS score, something like that. Can the existing KPIs we already have be related to the processes, or do we have to create a whole new one?
I would say in a lot of instances, KPIs that you already have will translate to a lot of the processes that you put in place.
Okay. And then the other piece I was thinking about too is, with your work with your clients, how often does, when you come to the communication portion of it, how often does the system you use to document the processes or the technology actually hinder the overall implementation of everything?
It's a good question. I would say what we run into most of the time is that someone is in either too many technology systems, and then it doesn't really matter what process we try to document because there's just too many systems and too disorganized. So that, and really that's why we look at tech and process at the same time. Like, how can we really get you to the ideal tech stack? And most of the time, companies aren't taking full advantage of the platforms that they're in. And so let's really look at how can we take full advantage of these softwares and systems that you're already in to put automations in place, or give more visibility, or build a workflow all the way through. And so that's definitely something that we run into, but that's probably the biggest one.
All right. So I could ask you questions all day, but I'm going to wrap up with my last question, and then we'll move to some of the Q&A. So we've got a couple questions in Q&A already, but now's the time to start dropping those in there if Daphne's spurred anything that you want to talk further about. So let's talk about biggest mistakes. What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen business owners make with this entire process and system?
So I feel like I've already touched on a couple of them, but I'll go back and name my top three. So the one I just touched on is that they don't look at tech and process at the same time, and they really miss out on a ton of efficiencies. The other one is that they only document current state, and they don't really think about, well, how could we solve for pain points or bottlenecks or things that aren't working well, or even innovate on what we're doing and do it even better. Or even thinking about their long-term strategy. And so they document for today, and then, 3 months from now, everything is already out of date. And then the third one, which we talked about early on, is they start in the weeds with procedures instead of really looking at those overarching journeys and processes. And then you get stuck in the weeds and you really never come out unless someone pulls you out.
Yes, been there. Yeah. Well, We are so lucky to have Dafne. She is a platinum partner for Exit Factor, for our clients, for our affiliate partners, anyone who needs more resources on this. This interview will live forever, evergreen in our online curriculum. Dafne has also added some additional resources you can use. I will send out a recap after this and link to theirs. I also dropped Dafne's email address in our chat for those who are attending live. So if you want to reach out directly to her, you can do so. I'm going to go ahead.